This is the BreadWinner Podcast, hosted by entrepreneur, influencer, and sales wolf, Tyler Harris, bringing you the insights from the most successful forward-thinking entrepreneurs and influencers, so that you can rise to the top and make more dough.
Now, let's get into the show.
What's up, everybody? This is Tyler Harris, and I am your host of the BreadWinner Podcast. Super excited today to have Campbell with us. He's going to jump on here in just a second, but man, he's a motivational speaker, writer, entrepreneur. One of the coolest things that I read about you, man, is the very first, I think, sentence of your bio said that you believe in the transformation of the human soul, which is absolutely awesome. But this guy is a former NFL, former West Point grad, former military, which I have the utmost respect for. So I'm super excited to have you on and kind of talk about what your main focus is now. But if you could just introduce yourself, man, tell everybody where you're from. And I'd love to just hear your story, and then we can kind of go from there, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. Like you said, my name's Caleb. I'm originally from a small Texas town in the very top of the Texas Panhandle, what you know as Tornado Alley. I grew up on a farm, actually, where I used to walk pigs for 4-H shows, which is just still strange to me. But, you know, I went from Perryton, Texas, a town of like 9,000 people, got a Division I scholarship to play football at West Point. And, you know, it was at West Point when I knew, like, yeah, sure, as a kid, I had a childhood dream of playing in the NFL, but let's get real. But my sophomore year, I turned out to be like, I had a breakout season, and it turned out I was like number 6 strong safety in the entire country for college football.
Wow.
A lot of scouts started coming around, a lot of NFL agents started coming around, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this could actually become a reality. Well, when you go to West Point, your sophomore year, after your sophomore year, going into your junior year, you basically take the oath. And that's essentially saying, hey, I'm in this for the long term. Yeah. So when you graduate West Point, you're commissioned as an officer, and you have a 5-year minimal commitment in the U.S. military as an officer. Well, my sophomore year, I was kind of like, listen, you know, I was in a lot of trouble. I was always getting in trouble at West Point, and I basically said, my childhood dream is to play in the NFL. Like, I'm out. Like, I'm in tons of trouble. It's not a good fit for me. I was breaking under the pressure. Well, that's when the Department of Defense, long story short, comes in and they say, hey, like, if you want to play in the NFL, we just adopted this new policy that will give you the opportunity to serve simultaneously while playing a professional sport if you have a professional contract. So I go into my junior year, take the oath with the understanding that there's a new policy. It's called the Alternative Service Obligation Policy. And essentially, if I get drafted, then I could play and serve simultaneously. Long story short, fast forward 2 years, I graduate West Point. I was selected in the NFL draft. Childhood dream comes true. I'm in Radio City Music Hall. I'm hanging out with, at the time, you know, Rachel Nichols. It's just a childhood dream come true. I get drafted. And then day of my contract signing, the Department of Defense calls and says, hey, that policy that we put into effect 2 years ago, it no longer exists. So they essentially rescinded that policy. They ripped it up, and then I had to return back to active duty. So I went back to active duty. Everything was great. I started bobsledding for the U.S. Olympic team.
Nice.
And I did that for 3 years. And then I had applied for an early release. And so I went from serving, I got an early release. I got back and I played for Detroit, Kansas City, and Indianapolis. You know, bounced around practice squad, active roster, practice squad, active roster. But I guess the real story is kind of like I knew that while I was in the NFL, I was self-destructing. Yeah. Like, here I am in the middle of my childhood dream, and I'm literally showing up to practice high from the night before. Yeah. And I'm just self-destructing. You know, I woke up one morning, I said, oh my God, like, if something doesn't change and change soon with me, I'm done. Yeah. Like, life is not going to continue for me. And so that's when I decided to stop everything. I got cut for the last time. And then I said, okay, like, I went to West Point, and there was tons of people offering me amazing job opportunities. But I realized that unless something internally changed inside of me, I was going to continue to hit that same ceiling despite what environment I was in. Because I wanted to demonize football. I wanted to say football was the issue, football's bad, football's this, football's that. And I think we have the tendency to do that, right? We like to demonize the things and the people that are closest to us because of how it's making us feel. But the fact of the matter is, football wasn't the issue. It was revealing the issue inside of me. And so I stopped everything, man. I went from playing in front of 90,000 people in the NFL to moving to Canada. And for 4 years, I slept in a boiler room on the basement floor of a pastor's house so that I could be mentored. And for 4 years, I literally swept floors and cleaned toilets.
Wow.
And got mentored by this man, and it revolutionized my life. It completely changed the trajectory of my life. And that's essentially like the story that I talk about, the story behind the story. And then from that, I just recently birthed Why I Stopped. I think you guys seen that.
Yep.
It's the blog. It's a platform for people to tell their own Why I Stopped stories. But that's kind of like where I'm at right now. It's my brand message. It's what I believe in. And that's where I believe in the transformation of the human soul.
Yep.
Like one day we can wake up and we can realize that we don't have to experience life in the way that we've been told to.
Man, so let's go back to that unbelievable transition to Canada. Who was this? You said it was a pastor?
Yeah.
Who was the pastor, and how did you find him? Is that someone that you had been following for a while, or was it just something completely random?
You're not going to believe this, man. I was in between teams, getting ready to it was right before I signed with Kansas City, which was the last team I played for. I was in limbo. I was in my aunt's basement in Denver, Colorado, and I was drinking a lot of wine. And I'm scrolling through Twitter, man, and I come across this girl that I don't know, and she's talking about this transformation in her life. And it's the first time that I read somebody's message that put words to what I was feeling that I couldn't actually put feeling to or make sense of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I started following her, and I'm like, what is she doing? And long story short, she's going back to her hometown, Buffalo, New York, where she's going to start serving in this church. And I'm like, what church? Like, she has this amazing life. She's an attorney. She's she's doing amazing things. And like, she's leaving it all. So I started getting into this church, and I literally didn't tell anybody. Flew to Canada. I found this church. I sat in a service, and I'm sitting there, don't know anybody. I'm there by myself for a day on a Sunday just to listen to service because something in me was telling me to go. And then I was like, oh my God, this is where I'm supposed to be. And it wasn't like a divine sign. It was just this little, very, very small flicker of intuition that said, this is where I'm supposed to be. I still went to Kansas City, signed from Kansas City. I went home for a little bit, kicked and screamed because I didn't want to make the transition. Yeah. But eventually that's where I moved. That's how I found it, Twitter.
That's incredible, man. It's funny when those things happen, and you could have just as easy have brushed that off, especially when you said it was subtle. Like, you could just have easy of left there and not ever thought about it again, but making that decision to go and not go do something glamorous and not to go do something fun, go humble yourself, and be able to have that experience that ultimately brought you here, which is awesome, man. I have a similar story that you'll enjoy. This was, let's see, a couple of years ago. I had gone through this crazy transformation in my life over the last 4 years, from being just broke and depressed and out of shape and basically just rock bottom for me. And it was about a year and a half to 2 years into this transformation. Things were going incredible. But I started having this feeling of just like, what am I really supposed to be doing? What's my purpose in life? What was I put on this earth to do? And one Friday, I was leaving my office. I was driving up to Asheville, North Carolina. My wife was up there. It's where her family is. She had gone up earlier that day, and we were going to grill out with her family that night. So I'm headed up there. And when you go up there to Asheville, North Carolina, you go through the mountains at some point. And I always lose service on my phone at this one spot when I'm driving. And I just had a really rough day, and I'm in the car, and I just start praying, and not that kind of like super cool, happy pray, like the ugly crying pray. And I just told God, I was like, God, I need you to tell me right now, what am I supposed to be doing? Right now, show me, tell me right now, what am I supposed to be doing? And I've been texting with my wife, and I said something like, hey, headed up there now. You want me to grab some beer on the way? And she said our daughter had just been like a nightmare that day. And I said, or should I get beer and tequila? And that's when kind of like I lost service up in the mountains. And so I'm sitting there in this intense prayer, God, show me right now, what am I supposed to be doing? and I had just come up on the other side of the mountain, got service again. And my phone vibrates in my lap the second that I said, show me right now. And I pick up my phone and I look at it, and there's my wife responding in a very strange phrase that she hadn't used in this context for a long time. No one has in a long time, but it said, preach. That's all it said. So I'm like, God, show me what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Phone vibrates, look at it, says preach. And the crazy thing was, I looked at that and I'm like, come again? And we were in the process of starting a church. Are you familiar with Elevation Church?
Yeah.
Pastor Stephen Furtick. So we started a Greenville extension site of Elevation. We were in the process of doing that at that time. So like that idea like wasn't completely far-fetched, but for me, it was completely far-fetched.
Sure.
But the interesting thing that I found over the course of the next year is that it didn't say be a preacher. It said preach. And you can preach from any platform, and social media is certainly one of those. And it's just about putting a message out there that can reach hundreds, thousands, millions of people from this incredible platform that we all have access to. And so for me, that was one of those cool transitional periods of my life of kind of regaining focus on what I'm really here to do, which has been absolutely awesome. So let's go back. I do want to talk about real quick about the why I stopped, because I was scrolling through the website. The website, by the way, just aesthetically is freaking awesome. Like it's beautiful.
Oh, that means so much, man.
It's a really good site. Like I like how when you scroll and what happens with the videos when you do that. So where did that idea come from? And is that a big focus of what you're doing now? Or is that just something that's kind of on the side? Kind of what's the focus there?
Yeah, I was actually in the middle, like the second set of a deadlift. And I'm in the middle of the reps, and it's annoying because I do my best thinking in the gym, but it really throws my focus, and I don't get crap workout. And I always get crap workout now. But I was literally just deadlifting, and I was like, oh my God, like why I stopped. And for the longest time, I've been wanting to articulate this process. I wanted to put words to it. I wanted to bring it to fruition in some capacity, in some creative way. And I didn't want it just to be about me, but I knew that like when I had mentioned, like I read somebody else's story, and their story put words to what I was feeling.
Yep.
That was so important to me. And that has happened time and time and time again, because we don't know what we don't know.
Sure.
Right? And that's the beautiful thing of prophecy, right? When we look at other people's lives and the prophetic image of what we're about to step into, it gives us an understanding of what we're stepping into. And so I've been wanting to create a platform that allows other people to tell their story in their own why I stopped story, so that people can come along and say, A, I'm not alone, but B, oh my gosh, you just put words to what I've been feeling my entire life. Yeah. And then on the flip side of it, it's something that there is so powerful whenever you as the creator and telling your story and realizing that your truth makes a difference.
Heck yeah.
Right? Your truth makes a huge impact on other people's lives. And you start to realize that my healing, my transformation just wasn't for me, but it's literally opening up doors for other people. Yep. And it has a ripple effect on other people. And that, makes profound impact. So that's how I kind of came up with why I stopped. And truthfully, it's been, I started in Buffalo. I started a marketing and design digital marketing agency with a friend. We scaled 2 of us to 9 of us or 8 of us, and we're about to take off. And just in end of January, I was like, this isn't my path. Like, this isn't what I want to do. And if I don't get out now, it's going to take off, and I'm going to stay here. Yeah. And so I just left recently and kind of going all in on my brand. Trying to make sense of it. I have no idea what I'm doing, but And so why I stopped is just recently, basically last week, I said, this is my main focus. This is the story that I want to tell. This is the community I want to build.
Awesome. Well, if there's an opportunity available, man, I'd love to get on there and tell my story. Because I've got a really interesting story as well. And it's funny, man, like 18 months ago to 2 years ago, I'm standing on stage talking to a group of insurance agents. And I asked them, and I love asking this question. I said, what's the one area in your life that you're pretending isn't a problem? What's the one area in your life that you're pretending isn't a problem? And then it's always like, okay, just a little hint, that thought that just came to your mind. That's it. So, let's figure that out. And then we can work on all this other stuff. But until you figure that out, there's really no point in trying to grow any further. But the crazy thing is, it was 2 years ago, 18 months ago that I said that. And like the second I said it, in my brain said alcohol. alcohol. But I was just like, no big deal. You just kind of brush it off, forget about it. And it wasn't until 7 months ago I completely quit drinking. So I haven't drank in 7 months now. It's been the most incredible period of time in my life. But when you talked about feeling alone or feeling by themselves, like that's exactly like when I looked at the why I stopped, like when you're going through a difficult time or a struggle, you feel like you're on an island. Like you feel like no one's ever gone through this ever before. But then you go to a site like this and you see all these stories and you're like, wait a second, like their story's worse or their story's similar or their story, it resonates with me. And then through other people telling their stories, it gives them the audacity to go and tell theirs to someone, because that's usually the first step. And the most important step is just to talk to someone about it. I think it's more important than ever for us as men to be able to do that, because men historically do not have the ability, but do not have the outlet to have these types of conversations with other men. Right. And I think that's become a huge passion of mine, is trying to create that environment. And so with all my social media stuff, transparency, vulnerability, like that's the main core focus. And in sharing things like when I have this daily vlog that I've been doing since January. We've got like 117 episodes, something like that. But on episode 100, we're like, hey, how are we going to celebrate, the 100th episode? It's kind of a big milestone kind of deal. And on the 100th episode, I literally walked into a room, sat down. It was the exact same scene from the very first episode. But I walked in a room, sat down and said, well, over these last 100 episodes, we've had, incredible things that have happened, stories, all this stuff. And I've been lying to you the entire time, because this entire time I've been struggling with the fact that I quit drinking like 30 days before I started this vlog. And I've never even talked about that to you. And so I started opening up about that, like the messages that poured in that next day. Like one guy said, I've been struggling with alcoholism for 17 years and talked to my wife about it last night for the first time after seeing that video, and things like that. And then I've opened up with some other stuff here recently that were very difficult to open up with. But like every time you do, it's this idea of just living in truth, and withholding the truth and lying is the exact same thing. So it's easy to say like, oh yeah, I'm all about living the truth when it's comfortable, or I'm all about living the truth when it makes me look good. Right. But when you put everything out there, it's almost like that rap battle scene in 8 Mile, where you're like basically telling everything bad about you. And so that no one's got anything on you because you've already told it. And it's expressing gratitude for those things, right? Like I'm so freaking grateful for the struggles that I've had, the things that have happened to me, the things that I've done, and being on the other side of that now, because it's made me who I am. Right. And I think that's, for me, becoming a huge focus is, number one, like you're doing, showing people these stories of other people that they can resonate with so they don't feel alone. But then number two, showing them that like when you're in it, like, hey, there's a huge freaking blessing right on the other side of this, but you have to get through what you're doing to become the person that can receive it. Yeah. And that there's purpose, and there's so much encouragement in that, because you will be incredibly grateful for what you're going through right now. What I can't figure out yet is like how to really convey that, because the person that's in it, like they're like, screw you, like you don't understand, you don't get it. Like I understand what you're saying. It's all going to be good in the end, but it's not taking the gun out of my mouth tonight. Right. So how you convey that message, because it is always in hindsight that they understand it. So what are some of your thoughts on that? Like, because now this is, I guess, your main focus is conveying that message to people, because you want to reach people that are in it.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you look at why I stopped and you look at all the stories, there is like almost across every single story, the common denominator that is found in every story is there is an element of shame. Yeah. That people have to work through. And you hit the nail on the head. Like, shame thrives in secrecy. Right? And shame, just when you don't deal with shame, it just perpetuates the cycle over and over again. And so shame thrives in secrecy. So the first step is recognizing that you're not alone in all of this. and that somebody else is going through a process that, or in a situation that you've gone through, or maybe similar to what you're going through. But I think a critical component of this, Tyler, you hit the nail on the head, is I think we as human beings, we have to be able to hold space better for people. We have to be able to create an ecosystem, an environment where you can come to me and you can open up, and I don't respond with, well, get your shit together, Tyler.
Yeah.
Or I don't respond with, well, I know somebody else that has it worse. Or I don't respond with just an answer that just reinforces the shame of what I'm feeling or why I'm feeling it, right?
Yep.
And the only way we can get better at holding space, because it's in that very sacred space that, connection is made. And the only way we can get better at holding space is by first creating space. People don't know how to hold space, or don't have the capacity to hold space, because they haven't yet created space. And what I mean by creating space is I mean dealing with your own pain, dealing with your own wounding. Quit offsetting your emotion. Quit inflicting your pain onto other people. Create space. Stop and ask why you feel what you feel and why you think what you think. And maybe along the lines, question why you believe what you believe. And ask yourself, have you ever actually been lied to before? Right? And so whenever you begin to create space, we can now begin to hold space more efficiently and effectively for other people going through that same process. And I think that is such a missing component, because, it's the first thing we think of. Like, I got my own issues. Don't bring your issues to me.
Yeah, sure.
Right? I got my own issues. Yeah, that's true. But you also have to take responsibility for your own issues, work through that so that you can be able to. Human connection is what we were made for, Tyler.
Yeah, absolutely.
Human connection is what we were made for. And when you hold space for another human, or for another soul, that connection is the bridge to meaningful relationships, which is actually the fulfillment that we're looking for. Physiologically speaking, all the neuroscience that's coming out right now centered around this topic, it speaks volumes to it. So I think that's where I'm really kind of focusing on is I don't look at Why I Stop just as a platform for people to share their stories, but Why I Stop is this ecosystem that in and of itself is designed to hold space.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking for.
It's almost like creating capacity, because the reality is, like, our brains only have so much capacity, and we're giving away so much of it to this drama over here, this lie we keep believing over here, this opinion that we think someone has of us over here, this shame, like you said, that we have over here. And all of a sudden we're working with 40, 50% capacity.
Right.
We don't have the ability to not only create space, but hold space for anybody else, because you hardly have enough space for yourself. And I think, man, it's so important, especially as men, because you said that connectivity is everything. But I think somewhere along the line, men decided that was not the case.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but I think there's a strong movement right now. People like yourself and you remind me a whole lot of Lewis Howes and some of the stuff that he talks about with the masculinity, that I think it needs to be furthered so much more, because the reality is, as a man, you're walking down the hall, you're driving down the road. Hey man, how you doing? Great. Hey man, how you doing? I'm good. No complaints. But meanwhile, they're cheating on their wife, their kids hate them, their business is struggling, and they're barely staying above water. But this idea, like you just said, of holding space is creating an environment to where people can be honest and be vulnerable, which is very, very, very difficult for the majority, because they've been lied to their entire lives, and they've been told that that's not okay. Like, it's not okay to talk about what's really going on. You got to put up this front, and social media has done an incredible job at showing people that, like, hey, it's all about the highlight reel. It's all about showing the best parts of your life and completely keeping those hidden areas hidden. So I think, man, you're on to such an incredible start to that. I mean, it's more important than people realize. It's more
I think, to be honest with you, like, whenever I was going through this change, like, I wanted to know why was I addicted to pornography?
Yep.
Why did I have to bring home a girl every night I went out to the bar, and not just bring home a girl, but use her?
Yep.
I had no intention of doing anything beyond just sex with her. Why did that make me feel more powerful?
Yeah.
Why did that make me feel more in control? Like, these were things that were literally destroying my life and would make me physically sick to my stomach. And if I didn't numb that pain, and I couldn't sit with that pain, it hurt too much.
Yeah.
Like, there were just questions I did not want to ask, but I knew if the cycle of life that I was still in didn't change, I was going to continue to destroy people's lives while destroying my life. I say that because what has to change is, as men, we want to live brave lives. We want to live courageous lives.
Mm-hmm.
We're hunters and gatherers. It's what we were created to do. Like, we were created to lead. But when we were a young kid and we were told to suck it up and quit crying, when we were a young kid and we were told that, it's a sign of weakness when you show weakness, or when you talk about your weakness, people are going to, get over you, and you need to suck it up and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and drive on, son. Like, right there, when we don't understand, like, even if the parent has good intention, we don't understand that in that moment we were just shamed for expressing our vulnerabilities.
Yep.
And we learn to internalize our fear. And when we learn to internalize our fear, it's going to manifest. And it's going to manifest in one of two ways, essentially based by your personality type. For somebody that's result-oriented, performance-driven, now that usually manifests in perfectionism, rage.
Yep.
Rage is huge. Like, I had such a rage issue, and it took me hundreds of counseling sessions to attach my rage issues to being shamed for expressing vulnerability as a kid.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing for pornography. I never knew pornography was me trying to control an environment so that I can find ultimate satisfaction at the expense of another person.
Yeah.
And that all started from being shamed as a young kid.
Yeah.
And so we have to do better at really articulating the message that, hey, there's different ways to raise your children. I don't have kids. I can't even begin to imagine what that is like. But at the end of the day, this idea that vulnerability is synonymous with weakness is the biggest lie. It is the biggest lie, because vulnerability is the birthplace. I think Brene Brown says it. It's the birthplace of all of what we're actually desiring in life. And so we need more men to step up and to deal with their pain.
Yep.
To recognize that it's okay, that you are not your pain and it's not a sign of weakness. To recognize that your control issues and your performance issues and your rage issues, and whether it's pornography or drinking or alcoholism or drug use, whatever it is, like, recognize that those are all symptoms of a deeper issue.
Yeah.
And if you actually want your life to change, we got to get to the deeper issue.
Yeah. And I like how you said I think it's on your site on Why I Stopped, that you have to go like way, way, way back.
Yeah.
And get a sense of understanding of all that's going on before you can even start to move forward, which is work. I mean, like you just talked about, hours and hours and hours of counseling. That takes work, and that's work that a lot of people aren't willing to put in. But when you understand that vulnerability is strength, the funny thing about that is when you see people on stage being vulnerable, it's so easily apparent. You're like, oh yeah, that the vulnerability that they just share, man, that dude's so strong for sharing that. But why is it that on an individual basis, or when it comes back to me, like why do all of a sudden I feel as though vulnerability may be a sign of weakness when I'm seeing the guy on stage be vulnerable, and I look at that as a strength? Mm-hmm. It's interesting to get that down to the individual level. But I mean, vulnerability. There's a guy in town here. He told me this concept. He called it puddle love, and it's this idea that you can drown in 3 inches of water. And the reality is that's where all of social media lives. And quite frankly, that's where all of our conversations live. Right. The vast majority of people's conversations on a daily basis live in that 3 inches of water. And so I have made this conscious effort here in the last few months of just going deep in every single conversation. And it's almost humorous because a lot of times, I've got a videographer that travels with me. And a lot of times, we'll sit down with someone, and it could be the first time I've met them, someone that I've known. But, the camera's rolling and it's just like, hey man, what's going on? Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Sit down. And then all of a sudden it's just like deep. Like all of a sudden we're digging out stuff that is just insanely deep. And it's some of the best conversations and some of the best connections that I've been able to create with people And in doing so, the practice of doing that, have become better at it,
Mm-hmm.
but have become a better person because of it, because I actually genuinely care now. Like normally it was just like, you're having a conversation and it's mainly small talk. I'm not really in it. But when you really try to connect with another human being, you can't help but care for that human being when you're connecting on that level. And when they're being vulnerable is when it takes that connection to the next level.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's you being vulnerable first to give them the audacity to then share something. And then you share something else, and then they share something. And that's the cornerstone of great communication with other people. And again, like I keep going back to this, as men, it just is something that is not happening on a regular basis. Like I think about, people like my dad, my friends, and especially an older the prior generation, like they're not having these conversations with other people. Maybe, if they're really connected with a church and they're in like a small group, especially if it's a men's group, they may have some of those conversations, but there's so much that they're just not willing to expose. Yeah. And I think that it's a problem because it's their willingness to expose those things that's going to teach our generation how to be a man. Like, what does it mean to be a man? Like you have this idea. I was on this podcast. I don't know if you've heard of the Order of Man podcast with Ryan Mickler.
I know him. Yeah.
Yeah. So his whole thing is like, what does it mean to you to be a man? And this idea, like, what does it mean to be a man? And all these things that over the years and over time are synonymous with being a man. But what if being a man meant being vulnerable, meant being able to show your emotions and all those things? Like, what kind of world would we live in if that was the case? And it's just, to me, it's just become such a huge focus, which I love. I love the fact that that's really, that's what you're doing. And it's awesome to see. So what does it look like moving forward for you? I know you said you're like, you have no idea kind of what, what I'm doing right now, which to be honest is like the best place to be.
Everybody keeps saying that.
It's kind of like back to that blessings on the other side of this, and you're like, yeah, screw you. But what is it that you want to do? Like when you think about, man, like if I could do anything, what would that look like for you?
I think it's I want to help change people's lives by changing what they believe, by facilitating a conversation with them that helps them. And I'm not a shrink, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a guru, right? But I think you can't give away what you don't first possess. Okay, I'm a strong believer in that. So for me, there's this continuous, I thought everybody wanted to ask tough questions. Like I have this weird desire to be vulnerable. Like for myself, I want to know why I think what I think and do why I do and get to the root of these issues. And I thought everybody was like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, everybody likes that, right? Took me some time to realize that's just not the case. And so for me personally, it's kind of like I want to continue getting to, my deepest desire, Tyler, is to live a whole life.
Yeah.
Physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I can't live a whole life whenever, WHOLE, whenever it's full of shame or guilt or trauma. And so there is this constant, like, we're never going to get rid of shame, but we will build a resilience to shame. And being able to help people have that same breakthrough in their lives. Like, they don't understand, like, you are literally one thought process away from your life forever changing.
Yep.
And we just need to focus this conversation and navigate this journey through, navigate this journey so that you can begin to ask the questions that are literally going to change your life when you're able to answer them. Like, I think I just heard somebody talk about how, like, shame, I know I'm using shame a lot, but it's the swampland of the human soul. And oftentimes we stand alongside the shore of shame, and we're looking at this swamp, and we do not want to walk through that swamp, but we fail to recognize that along the shore of swampland is quicksand. And we're literally standing in quicksand, and we're ever so slightly sinking a little bit more each and every day until we're in over our heads, because we think that it's more traumatizing or more painful to walk through the shame, to walk through the swampland. And so being able to create an ecosystem or a conference or an environment, or I know a lot of people are doing this, and it's not like, I need to go do something on my own because I have to feel significant in this world. Like, be able to partner with somebody that's doing these types of things, because I think it's pivotal. I think it's important. And people need to realize that you can change.
Yep.
Like, you don't have to continue to experience life in the way that you were told, or that the way you're currently experiencing it. You're shaping your own reality. So let's change the experiences that are currently shaping your reality.
Man, that to me is the most exciting part when you talk about you can change. Like, when you do embrace this idea, and I'm very similar to you right now in this kind of quest to be as vulnerable as humanly possible, to the detriment, like, it's made my family very uncomfortable. It's made people extremely uncomfortable in things that I'm sharing. They're like, I don't really know if you should have shared that. I'm like, no, but it's the truth. So I'll share.
Have you got tone it down, Tyler. Tone it down.
Oh yeah. Like, you don't need to share everything. Like, because there was something big recently that I shared, and I told my wife, and I hadn't told my wife about it. When I told her about it, she's like, you really don't need to be super public about that. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And she's like, yeah, but what is this person going to say? What is this person going to say? I was like, that's not really of any consequence to me. Like, it doesn't bother me. And I think it's an interesting concept of ego with vulnerability, because that's really what it comes down to. And what we've been talking about a lot is the fact that those that have the least ego, those that have dropped their ego the most, often appear to have the biggest ego. Right. Because they don't care what other people think. Yeah. Like I look at a guy like Sean Whalen that I mentioned in the beginning. Like, this guy, when he stands on stage and talks, you look at him and you're like, man, this guy's just egotistical. He's just full of himself. It's like, no, like, he's just free. Like, he's completely free, because he can stand there and say, like, I don't care what any of you think. Right. But I'll do anything for any of you. Right. And I think, and that's the key.
Yeah. I think like a lot of people have this disposition of, I don't care what you think. I'm going to do my thing. Great. But I think we have to get really real and say, is that disposition, while the statement is true, like, you shouldn't care what other people think, but is it rooted in love, or is it rooted in fear? Exactly. Or is it rooted in pain? And that's where I think a lot of people miss the boat, is they live these lives where, I don't care what you think, I'm going to do me. Awesome, do you. But you're doing you from a place of hurt. You're doing you from a place of pain. So you're going to go do you, and the whole world's going to look at it, but you're not going to be fulfilled because you've got this wall around your heart, and you're doing you in despite of other people instead of for other people. And so that's the big difference I find with people is, like, looking at the motives. What is the driving force behind why you do what you do? Is it rooted in love and selflessness and faith and hope? Or is it rooted in fear and dread and selfishness and pain? Yeah. Because that makes the biggest difference in whether you are actually going to accomplish something and feel fulfilled versus accomplish something and it never being enough and needing to accomplish more and more and more. Right? And Absolutely. So I feel like that has to become a central topic, is like really examining the driving forces behind our lives. And that's why I stopped.
And the reality is, like, people are never going to quit caring what other people think. And I think that that idea is ridiculous, but it's not letting what other people think control your actions. Right. I think that's the big thing is understanding that, like, yeah, these people are going to say these things, but I'm still going to do these things anyways, because I know it'll help them. And getting back to the exciting part is now, when vulnerability becomes such a huge part of your life and trying to have this connectivity with others, it's almost like when you're having a conversation with someone, they start being vulnerable and they start uncovering some of these things that they've been through or that have happened to them or things they've done. I start getting so excited. Like, the worse it is, like, the more excited I get. And like the other day I was talking to this guy at lunch, and he just started just opening up and pouring out just horrific things that have happened. And at the end of it, and I just kind of sat there and listened. And at the end, he's like, so what do you think, man? I was like, man, I got to tell you, I'm so freaking excited for you. And he was like, what? What do you mean? I'm like, man, like, I can tell, like, I can look in your eyes and tell, like, you've made that transition, like, you've made that change in a positive way. And it's almost directly proportionate. Like the worse things got, the worse things were, is how far you're going to go if you make that change. And that's the biggest encouragement there is. Like those are the stories that everybody, wants to hear. Like if you're able to make that change, sharing your story, it gives you that much bigger of a platform, because it's like, hey, if this guy that went through this, like if he can overcome that, and if he can be happy, and if he can be winning in all these different areas of his life, then certainly I can go out and make a change in my life. And it just, again, it gives people this sense of hope. And I think that ultimately that's what vulnerability does. It gives other people hope, because they may not have been through the same thing. There may be way less, maybe way worse. But you give people that glimmer of hope, and you never know where it's going to come from. That's what I love about social media. Like I've shared things on vlog episodes or on podcasts, and it's things that I didn't even see as that significant. And then you get a message that comes in, and you're like, man, you said this 2 nights ago on this vlog episode, and it absolutely just crushed me. And I've made this change and this change and this change. And I'm like, man, at that moment on that episode, I wasn't even thinking about that really impacting anyone. But I think it's this idea of just living in truth all the time, to where it enables those awesome, magical moments to happen. Yeah. You're just putting the truth out there, and those that will resonate, those that are in a place where they're willing and able to receive that message and have it do something within them, they're going to receive it no matter what. And that's so important.
I think in addition to what you said, if I can elaborate on something that I focus on in my life, is I often hear something like live your truth, or, like what does that look like? Yeah. Like, what does that look like to wake up today and to live your truth? Yeah. And I had to break that down for myself, and hopefully this is like practical enough to help somebody that might be listening to this. But to live your truth means to live from a place of truth. So to live from a place of truth means I don't live from a place of lie, right? And so like I broke this down, and I know there's a lot of science to this, but we have one or two things that we get to believe, right? So like from the ages of infancy to about 12 years old, our belief systems are formed, right? It's called the principle of first things. Whenever we experience something for the first time, that shapes our belief system, whether it's true or whether it's false. Yeah. Right? And so to live from truth means we live from a place of truth and not from a place of lies. So how do we know if we're actually believing a lie? Well, so for about 2 years, bro, I literally carry a notebook in my back pocket, and I do it now. Today, I'm better at it, so I don't have to do it with a notebook. But anytime I feel a negative emotion, if I feel fear, if I feel dread, or if I feel shame, if I feel like I'm hiding from something and I'm afraid of confronting something, if I feel anxiety or anger, whatever it is, I stop. Because you have to understand that we were never created or wired to feel negative emotions. There's actually a chemical reaction happening in our brain that is creating more chemicals than our brain knows what to do with. And as a result, we have these chemical imbalances that result in fear, and dread, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And so what happens is like every time you feel a negative emotion, stop. Like if you actually want your life to change, stop, because that negative emotion is actually rooted in a lie. So there's a lie that you've learned to believe in your life that's creating, because you're wired for truth. Truth is in your DNA. It's the essence of who we are. We are wired for love. Yep. So anything that comes alongside of your life and you feel a negative emotion to it, you then know there is something that you believe to be true about the world that isn't actually true. So that negative emotion, instead of reacting to it, learn to respond to it. Learn to hold space for it. Learn how to not to judge it, but to look at it and say, okay, wait a minute. I'm feeling a negative emotion right now. Therefore, I know this negative emotion is just a symptom of a deeper belief system that is not true. And as long as I live governed by this belief system that's not true, I'm not living truth. I'm not living my truth. I'm being dictated by a lie. Right? And so this is where a lot of people, this is how you can make it practical. There's a thing called the refractory period, right? So a refractory period is essentially when something happens and, you react to it, and you react to it for minutes, and the result of you reacting to it lasts like minutes or hours, let's say. Like that's what we get, a mood. I'm just in a mood. Leave me alone. I'm just in a mood because something happened, right? Sure. But if that lasts longer, let's say not just minutes or hours, but let's say days and weeks, now we have a temperament. Now we can look at people and say, man, why is that guy so bitter? Right? Because he's actually allowed his reaction to a negative emotion or to a situation. He's succumbed to it, and he's lasted for longer than hours or days. It's now weeks and months, and now it's becoming a temperament. If that continues to last longer, you don't get a hold of that, and if that continues to last longer for months and even years, that then begins to shape our personality. So if you understand that, like literally pain, anger, or something that happens in your life, and you react to it, and you don't actually stop and question it and question the narrative that you're telling yourselves in regards to it, it literally shapes your personality. And it is the very definition of living a lie. Wow. And so I find it like always helpful to say, okay, what does it actually look like to live truth, and how do I go about that in my everyday process? First and foremost places, start with your negative emotions. Because they're like bright neon signs saying, hey, massive growth right here. Yeah. And they're willing to go and do that journey.
The interesting thing, before I get into that, are there any specific books that you've read that have helped with that?
Everybody asks me this question. I need to write up. Oh, about that? No.
About that. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
It's so interesting what you just said, because a lot of what people learn, especially when it comes to like things like law of attraction, things like that, is to completely tone out that negativity, which is interesting. And when you talk about that is a symptom of a deeper belief system that isn't true. So it's basically tracing, okay, I'm feeling something negative. Something negative is happening. Let me trace that all the way back to where the root is, and figure out, why do I see that as a negative, or why do I process it or internalize it in a negative way, and then try to figure that out. And that's interesting that is, because I never really thought about that, because I have heard that a million times. Yeah, live your truth and live in truth, and it's like, what does that mean? Right. Just don't lie. But when you think about that, like it kind of breaks it down to a science and a process. And I think that is something that I need to learn more about that, certainly, because when you can break those things down, there's probably there's probably some core elements that many different negative things would fit into, that you can be like, oh, that's one of those. Oh, that's one of these. Oh, that's one of those. Mm-hmm. And it's not always kind of tracing back to this place where you have to all of a sudden do hours and hours of meditation and understanding and talking and figuring out it. Like, it fits into probably some categories of things that happen and ways of belief from those early childhood years. That's really, really, really fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up.
Like when you sat in that chair today, Tyler, did you stop and think like, wait, is this chair going to hold me up?
No, of course not.
Sat in it effortlessly without thinking about it. Why? Because you've been taught to believe your entire life that when you sit in a chair, it holds you up. Mm-hmm. But if you were 6 years old and you sat in a chair in a group of your friends and people that you love, and the chair went out from underneath you and you fell and you were laughed at and you were humiliated, you just had a very traumatic moment. That now whenever you might step on stage or step in front of a large group of people, you check that chair a couple different times to make sure you don't experience that same moment. Why? Because that traumatic event is still governing your life. That pain is still governing your life. And until we can stop and ask, why do we do what we do? Why do we say what we say? Why do I believe what I believe? Wait, is this something that taught me to believe? Like, is this something that's true? Or did I learn this and it's a lie? Like, we got to get really honest with ourselves. Like, a lot of us want change. A lot of us want to experience the life that we know is out there, but it requires us to open up closet doors that have some monsters in it that we've been running from our entire life. And, you know, that secrecy, that hiding it, and it comes, that's where it thrives. Yeah. And it really comes down to this whole human connection thing. Yep. Tyler, it's like this idea, like, what a culture values, we fear that we are not. So whatever a culture values, we fear that we are not. So automatically we tell ourselves, based on how we grew up, we tell ourselves that if you really know me, if you got to know me, there's no way that you would accept me for who I am. There is no way. So I'm going to hide. I'm going to hide my insecurities. I'm going to hide my flaws. I'm going to hide them behind my rage, my control, my massive success, the money that I make. I'm just going to hide because I know if I show you my real colors, it's going to threaten the very thing I crave the most, and that's human connection. But the problem with that is the real issue right there is that we are never going to belong in life, or let me say it this way. We only belong to our level of self-acceptance. Right? So the real issue that's behind your control, behind your rage, behind your pursuit of excellence, your pursuit of growth, the real thing that's going on behind all that is you're trying to be good enough, or you're trying to control the environment enough so that you are worthy of acceptance, because this whole time you've yet to accept yourself. Like self-love, it goes back down to the root. It's love, man.
Yeah.
Love. It's self-acceptance. And that's what we're all looking for.
Absolutely. And it's so liberating to be in that place and to be vulnerable. Every time I've been able to open up and in different areas of my life, there's this peace and this sense of freedom in it that you just want everybody to be able to experience, but it takes courage to do so. And that's the thing. It's super easy to just brush things under the rug and move on with life. And like you said, mask it with these other things like success and all this other stuff. That's the easy thing, but it's not sustainable long-term.
Never know.
Just like with anything else, like anything that's worth doing takes massive effort, and it takes strength. And I love what you just said there. I heard this thing on a run yesterday. It was Tom Bilyeu, and he was talking about Michelangelo, I think. And he said, if people found out the hundreds of thousands of hours that went into me working on my craft, would they think less of the genius that I am? Would they like that, takes it to a whole nother level. Like we're sitting here talking about if they knew about the pornography, if they knew about the alcoholism, if they knew about the drug addiction, if they knew about the adultery. But he took that a step further and probably, I'm assuming, had gone through that and said, if they knew how much work it took me to get to be this good, would they still see me as this good? As though there's some natural gift, as though LeBron James is a better basketball player because he woke up one day and was who he was versus the thousands of hours in the gym training. It's such an interesting concept, man. This has been an awesome conversation, man. I'd love to have some further conversations with you for sure. But I think for our viewers, this is going to be an awesome podcast, and we'll feature this on the vlog as well, so people can show that we did have a dress code for today. We're pretty much wearing the exact same thing, which is also awesome. But man, where can people find you online? Where can they go to Why I Stopped and all that good stuff? Yeah, so Why I Stopped is just whyistopped.com. Okay. And obviously, if anybody listening has their own Why I Stopped story, or if you want to know more information, you can just reach me through that website. You know what it reminded me of? Let me interrupt you there. It reminded me a lot of, are you familiar with I Am Second? Yeah, I mean, growing up in the Texas Panhandle. And I can remember, man, that there's been times I've spent hours at night watching all those videos, and it reminded me a lot of that, which is awesome. Awesome. Where can everybody find you on? So Instagram probably is the best place. So just at Caleb, CALEB_Campbell, like Campbell Soup. Got it. That's where I'm spending a lot more of my time as of late. Very good. Well, guys, with that, this is the BreadWinner podcast. Extremely glad to have had Caleb here on this episode. I think that you guys will get a lot out of this. You probably need to play it again because there was some stuff in there, some tactical stuff there towards the end that I'm going to listen back to, and I know I'll get a lot from. But as always, I'm your host, Tyler Harris, and we'll see you next time on the BreadWinner podcast.
Thank you for listening to the BreadWinner podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating on iTunes. For a chance to be on the show, send a screenshot of your iTunes rating to @TylerHarris page on Instagram, where he'll pick one person every single week. See you next time on the BreadWinner podcast.